The US government is investigating Nvidia, OpenAI, and Microsoft over potential antitrust violations. Welcome back to the AI Daily Brief. One of the realities of artificial intelligence so far, generative AI specifically, is that it seems to have concentrated more power in the hands of big tech. We've talked frequently on this show about how the high cost of compute has meant that a very small handful of companies can actually do so. How even Silicon Valley venture capital isn't necessarily enough capital for companies to compete at the state of the art. It's why we've seen these massive deals like Microsoft's 10-figure investment into OpenAI, Google and Amazon both plowing billions into Anthropic. There are other dimensions, though, that are also concentrating power. The fact that big enterprises that are plugging in their data to AI systems want to work with partners that they already trust creates even more momentum for the incumbents. And there are lots of people worried about this concentration of power. One group are the open source advocates, who fear that overzealous regulation too early will lead to regulatory capture for the players at the top of the heap. But the US government is also concerned about this concentration of power. And after some wrangling, the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission have now figured out and agreed how to divide responsibility for investigating 3 different players in the AI space for antitrust violations. Basically, the Justice Department and the FTC were both jockeying for positioning as related to investigating these players when it comes to potential antitrust issues. That means that they were delayed in having to sort out who was going to have jurisdiction over what. And according to reporting from the New York Times, the Justice Department will take the lead in investigating Nvidia, while the FTC will focus on OpenAI and Microsoft. This is not the FTC's first foray into the space. In July, they opened an investigation on whether OpenAI had harmed customers through its data collection practices. Back in January, they started a broad inquiry into these strategic partnerships between AI startups and big tech. Nvidia is perhaps new in some ways, but it's not necessarily surprising. Writes the Times, industry players have grown worried about Nvidia's dominance, 2 people with knowledge of the concern said, including how the company's software locks customers into using its chips, as well as how Nvidia distributes those chips to customers. The Justice Department has also been signaling their interest in this area. The Times piece concludes, last week, the Justice Department's Antitrust Division organized a conference about AI at Stanford University. In his opening remarks, Jonathan Cantor, the top antitrust official at the agency, pointed to, quote, structures and trends in AI that should give us pause. He continued, AI relies on massive amounts of data and computing power, which can give already dominant firms a substantial advantage. Cantor continued those comments today in the Financial Times as well. He said in an interview with FT that they are examining, quote, monopoly choke points in the competitive landscape, and are concerned that the nascent AI sector is, quote, at the high watermark of competition, not the floor. The interview gives a little bit more color on how they might think about some of these issues. From the FT, Cantor pointed to government initiatives to boost domestic production, including the $39 billion of incentives in the CHIPS Act, but added that antitrust regulators were looking at how chip makers decide to allocate their most advanced products amid rampant demand. Said Cantor, one of the things to think through is conflict of interest, a thumb on the scale, because they fear enabling a competitor or helping prop up a customer. If decisions are being made that show companies are not caring about maximizing profitability or generating shareholder value, but more looking at the competitive consequences, then that would be an issue. Another big question seems to be the sort of acqui-hire that happened with Microsoft and Inflection. When most of the 70-person team at Inflection left to join Microsoft, which then turned around and did a $650 million licensing deal with the company that effectively bought out their early investors, many people thought it was Microsoft trying to get around potential antitrust concerns. Well, that clearly didn't work. As Cantor said, acqui-hires are something that antitrust enforcers will look at. We're not using stylistic or formalistic characteristics of how these companies explain these deals. We are looking at the market realities. We are focused on the facts. If the form is different but the substance is the same, then we will not hesitate to act. We look at what are the raw materials to produce a product, whether that's steel or engineers, that fits within the traditional paradigm of what we care about. Microsoft, for its part, pushed back on this, with President Brad Smith telling the FT, the partnerships that we're pursuing have demonstrably added competition to the marketplace. I might argue that Microsoft's partnership with OpenAI has created this new AI market, and without its help, OpenAI would not have been able to train or deploy its models. Adam Kovacevic on Twitter gave a little bit more background on this horse trading between the Department of Justice and the FTC. He said, if the past is a guide, the deal is likely to result in AI-related antitrust lawsuits as early as next year against Microsoft, Nvidia, and OpenAI. Adam continues, most people know that the FTC and the DOJ share responsibility for antitrust enforcement. There used to be a quaint time when the agencies split antitrust investigations and cases along industry lines. This approach had 2 virtues. Agency staff could develop expertise in industry areas, and investigations started by looking at competitive dynamics within industries, rather than, say, picking a prominent company the agency wanted to sue and then figuring out a case. This all broke down over big tech. Both agencies had brought cases in tech, but it was a big, juicy, headline-grabbing target. So FTC spent the Obama and Trump years sparring over turf. This resulted in a 2019 handshake deal. FTC would take Amazon and Meta, DOJ would take Apple and Google. This wasn't a principled way to approach antitrust enforcement, it was a target-driven approach. The result was unsurprising. The agencies weren't going to spend all that time sparring, reach a deal, and then not bring antitrust cases. That would look weak. A year later, FTC and DOJ brought their first cases under this deal. FTC versus Facebook and DOJ versus Google. So far, the government's record on the cases brought under this deal: 0 wins, 1 loss with Meta, 1 motion to dismiss lost, Meta, Instagram, WhatsApp, 1 trial in progress, Google Search, 4 cases not yet at trial stage. A problem facing all these cases, the agencies started with the target companies, decided they wanted to bring cases, and then figured out the best cases to bring. Rather than looking at industries overall, they found cases to fit their targets. This has resulted in the agencies contorting themselves to define markets and judges rejecting and being skeptical about those definitions. Flash forward to 2023 and the rise of AI. For the last year, FTC's Lena Khan and DOJ's Cantor have given speeches about the danger of AI monopolization, despite the A, nascent quality of the industry, and B, the incredible competition among both incumbents and upstarts. These speeches were really about turf, trying to position their respective agencies to lead on AI. Now, Khan and Cantor have reached a deal where DOJ will add Nvidia and FTC will take on Microsoft and OpenAI. Is this a principled way to approach antitrust enforcement in AI? No. It is a target-based, headline-seeking approach. Based on the previous deal, it will almost certainly result in government lawsuits. But so far, DOJ and FTC's myopic approach has been their undoing. Robert Sterling summed up the feeling of a lot of people when he said, "The federal government wants to kill the AI industry in its infancy. By launching antitrust investigations at such an early stage, they are sending a signal that they intend to regulate the industry with a heavy hand. Ironically, this will reduce the flow of capital into AI, resulting in fewer startups, reduced competition, less disruption, and even more dominance for today's incumbents. But I wouldn't expect career DOJ or FTC bureaucrats to understand this." Max Meyer from 8VC points out how this has worked in the past. He writes an antitrust story in 3 parts. 1, Adobe to buy Figma for $20 billion. Amazing for customers. Prices low forever. 2, DOJ, no, monopoly. 3, Figma doesn't make enough money to IPO, has to raise prices significantly. Well done, antitrust bureaucrat morons. Even more on the point is Darryl Bosanjo, who writes, investigating Nvidia or OpenAI for being too dominant in AI makes it seem like these antitrust investigations are about punishing success. Breaking up Nvidia or OpenAI sounds absurd, especially when the industry is fairly nascent. As you can probably tell, my biases lie with these folks who think that this is not a particularly good use of government resources at this time. It's not that I don't think concentration of power is an issue. It's more that I don't think the remedy is government regulators, and particularly antitrust regulators at this stage. Capitalism is doing its job right now. If you look at the market for chips, yes, Nvidia is dominant, but they have never faced more of an all-out assault from so many different angles. And when it comes to LLMs and the underlying models, the single best thing that governments could do would be to support open source efforts, but that seems like exactly the opposite of what they're going to go for. Ultimately, this is just the beginning of jockeying for power when it comes to AI and government, and I think it's going to get a lot messier from here. For now, though, that is going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Until next time, peace.